good things are good. When rich people have literally all of the wealth and money and power on earth, that's bad, because we all live here too, and we need to afford rent and like hang out with friends and eat and not starve to death, and probably plap our cute baby girl every now and again without worrying that one of us is gonna die in a few months from not being able to afford their medicine. Okay. React Andy time. Properties. We are going to look at unlearning economics. Why is Mr. Beast on our screen? Don't worry, he won't be there for long. Yeah. Probably not going to have much time to do this, but I was struck by this because I saw one Thomas Piketty in the thumbnail of this video. So I was like, all right, I will not tolerate Piketty slander. Let's see what's up.
You're a billionaire. I'm like, that's net worth. I have negative money right now. I'm borrowing money. That's how little money I have. Thumbnail
reminds me of the video how Mr. Beast is what Karl Marx warned us about. Yeah, the commodification of everything. And Mr. Beast is a unique example of that because he is like the commodification and alienation of humanity itself. You know, he's mentioned before that like he's completely empty, absolute shell of a person.
The explosion of billionaire wealth has been one of the most dramatic evolution of the world economy of the last decades.
We already have the most progressive tax system in the world. The top 1% of taxpayers pay 40% of all the tax revenue.
Democrats in California.
That's made up, by the way.
Are proposing a tax on the assets of billionaires across the state. Elon Musk has called on the state's Governor Gavin Newsom to scrap the idea.
We've got a poll on the Daily Mail website right now saying, do you think we need a wealth tax? And we are winning.
On the Daily Mail. That's crazy.
We campaign for more taxes on wealth, and particularly reduction of extreme wealth inequality and so on.
When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the poor.
I hope there is no Zoran Mamdani slander, because I will not tolerate Zoran Mamdani slander either. But nonetheless, let's see what Unlearning Economics is cooking on this fine day.
Everyone seems to be talking about a wealth tax these days, and for good reason. The wealthy today are like really, really wealthy. Wealth inequality has been increasing in recent years at what feels like an exponential rate. We have had the world's first trillionaire, something which I wouldn't...
It also doesn't just feel like an exponential rate, it literally has been an exponential rate. I've seen the data that many economists refer to when they talk about the increase of wealth and wealth inequality around the world. It's not like... it's not a super sharp exponential curve, but it is an exponential curve in that, like, not only is the difference growing, the rate at which the difference is growing, you know? It's like classic x squared versus x type shit. Just not with that high of an exponent, if that makes sense.
I've predicted even 5 years ago. Wealth inequality seems to have overtaken income inequality, both factually and as a political focus. In the old days, rich people might have been paid a lot of money, and while that's still true to an extent, these days...
Zoran Mamdani fanboys up in here? Or femboys, take your pick, that's true. Or, Zoran Mamdani, girlies. I don't know.
As they build wealth, then use that wealth to do all sorts of things, from spending on things they want, to buying out entire companies. Even in the UK, where there are no trillionaires, the Gini measure of inequality...
I think that alone spells out why we need a wealth tax. Oh yeah, using their wealth for stuff like buying an entire company, right? Like, I don't think you should be able to do that. They, them do love their Mom Donnie either way. It is true. The they, thems are for Mom Donnie. They do love that shit.
Is 0.35 for income, but 0.59 for wealth. And that is likely an underestimate. It would be one thing.
Not likely is an underestimate, but they like do. No, the thing about statistics like this that are measuring something that's at least partially vibes based, or that's like obscured or buried under layers of abstraction, economists and social scientists, anybody that deals in data, they tend to take underestimates or conservative estimates that will give you a smaller number, but one that is good for picturing, like, at the very least, we know that is at least this much, right? Like, it cannot possibly be less than this. Likewise, this Gini coefficient number for England being 0.59, which is really bad, by the way. It's a metric of inequality. And we know that it is at least that bad, but it's impossible to get like a 100% accurate picture. So they give you like, you know, at the very least, this is how bad it is. What's the title of the video? Sure. The title of the video is A Wealth Tax Won't Work the Way You Think. Which I imagine for many people, this might be true. But for me, I thought, and I think that I have a decent idea of how a wealth tax would work. But that's because I've read fucking Piketty's volumes of Capital and various studies on how, like, what wealth is composed of. Thanks. Yeah, no problem. No problem. It's from Unlearning Economics Live. Unlearning Economics is a great YouTube channel. I would highly recommend people watch them if they are interested at all in economics. Or you could also just keep listening to me, because I'm pretty cool too. Let's play the video.
The rest of it. It would be one thing if they shut the hell up about it, but today's wealthy seem determined to flaunt their wealth and piss everyone off in the process.
Yeah.
The world's first trillionaire is also the world's biggest loser. He's ruined arguably the most important social media site in the world, effectively killed hundreds of thousands of the poorest people on the planet by cutting off their health and nutrition, and most upsettingly for people on the internet, he can't even get through the tutorial of Path of Exile 2.
That is honestly, like, so tragic that he can't do that. But yeah, the bit about billionaires showing off their wealth so much, it's not specifically about flaunting it. I've mentioned this before. They're so insecure, and they're desperate to justify that it is morally good or morally acceptable or morally necessary even that they have the wealth that they have. You know, that they enjoy that station. They are such shells of human beings. They have to convince themselves that they serve a function, a unique function to society, that they must be permitted to exist on those terms. But of course, the reason they're so desperate to try to prove this, the reason they're so insecure and they try to showcase that they are using their wealth for useful things so frequently, and they try to build themselves up, is because they know ultimately that it's a bunch of bullshit. They know that they don't deserve that. Nobody does, you know?
Wealth contrasts starkly with an economy where many people are struggling to get by. Since the pandemic, the economy has been unreliable at best in most countries, with the cost of living crisis taking a chunk out of most people's budgets, plus uncertainty about similar shocks to living standards being stoked every single day. This creates resentment at an unfair system and demands for redistribution to help the average person. Related to this is that a lot of governments across the world have borrowed a lot of money and are, rightly or wrongly, pushing to close the gap between spending and taxes. Billionaires seem like an...
Spending and taxes? Right, yes. Okay. I do have a slight critique about that framing, which is that it's not so much they're trying to close the gap. If governments were trying to close the gap, what they would be doing is raising taxes. But what they're trying to do rather is justify reductions in spending. The governments of the world right now have very little interest in increasing taxes to shore up for wealth, like shortfalls in their own coffers, or you know, and obviously not to like address any sort of inefficiencies as well, because that would necessitate getting rid of all sorts of public-private partnerships and that sort of thing, right? No, what they're interested in doing is spending as little money as it is possible to get away with on their own people, while maximizing the amount that they are skimming off of the top from tax revenues. And by that I mean not the politicians personally, but rather them funneling that money into the private sector to contractors who do absolutely nothing with it, because the contracting process for wealth is ultimately designed to do the classical version of skimming off the top, where everybody gets their cut. Ultimately, maybe the thing gets done, maybe the thing doesn't, but many people walk away with a lot of money, and ultimately nobody's really better off for it. Let me get to this cannon, then I'll try to unpause, I think. Here we go.
Be a source of revenue to help with this, especially if we want to avoid more austerity. You can probably tell my own personal feelings about some of our modern wealthy from this intro. But, as a wise man once said, my company has gone bankrupt. In this video, I want to cut through the noise and rhetoric.
Nice Ben
whether a
Shapiro
wealth tax is
reference.
feasible, what likely effects it will have, and crucially, how much money it will raise. In this,
Ow.
I'm differing slightly from Barry's economics.
Damn it.
Yes, I said that right, get to know, who thinks that the wealth tax debate is a trap.
And that's why we need some kind of wealth tax as soon as possible. Just some kind, not perfect design, not endless debate, just direction. Because while we debate, billionaires are buying up housing, media companies and political influence. While we argue about how it would work, they're using that wealth to make sure we keep arguing forever. Movement matters more than perfection.
I agree that detailed policy
Absolutely
discussions
true.
are not the issue most people should be focusing on, nor is understanding 100-page reports a requirement for wanting to address inequality.
Yeah.
But my fear is that without a proper understanding of the problem, we could end up with a wealth tax that doesn't work, discrediting the idea.
It's also not necessarily the problem. I wanted to find a good place to pause to highlight this. The problem isn't just, you know, that there's not enough tax revenue coming from the top echelons of society. The fundamental problem is what they mentioned earlier, is that it's possible at all to just straightforwardly purchase political influence. It shouldn't be possible to just say, here's a large sum of wealth that no individual could possibly know what to do with. I now control society. That shouldn't be possible. That's the ultimate problem here. I'll get to something that I had like some thoughts on earlier in a bit, but like this would solve a problem, but it wouldn't solve the problem. So understand that when they're talking about the problem, they're not talking about something as fundamental as the profit motive. What they're talking about is just income and wealth inequality, which a lot of economists would have said in years past was the problem. But we're now facing problems so much bigger and more fundamental that you can't even call that the problem anymore.
Idea for a generation, and that already has
If that makes
happened.
sense.
Many European countries have experimented with wealth taxes, but they were not properly thought through and failed in most instances.
This is also not entirely true. It's another instance where like I kind of don't like the framing, but again, he's an economist, he's a smart guy, he knows what he's talking about. Many of those wealth taxes failed because they were designed to fail. It wasn't like, oh, you know, an earnest attempt at a wealth tax, because there are earnest attempts at a wealth tax that were such easy, simple, and resounding successes that fucking decades and centuries of political activism and action and change have been defined by the wealthy trying to erode those taxes away. No, the wealth taxes he's referring to here are ones that were designed maliciously so that they would fail and so that governments would have an excuse to never do wealth taxes again. Essentially, they were wealth taxes that were designed to kill the idea of a wealth tax. Does that make sense? like, here, bitch, damn. And then, like, when their intentionally Byzantine wealth tax obviously fails, they get to blame it on the concept of a wealth tax instead of, like, addressing the fundamental issue in any shape or form to try to drain the political will of the people, right? That's the objective there. Also, thank you, person who used the shock. And for the wealth taxes that did work, France has a version of this called the taxe foncière. Property taxes are a version of wealth tax that work amazingly well. Capital gains taxes are a thing too, or at least used to be in many places. Those worked pretty well as well. Even if there's a vulnerability that they don't tax unrealized gains, that's a form of wealth tax that a lot of economists have talked about. And unrealized capital gains tax. The Windows Endorse tax proposed by Adam Smith himself is actually another pretty good functional version of a wealth tax. Back in the day, when it was harder to value certain properties because people were less willing to just say, vibes, you would count the windows and doors that like a house particularly had, and that would determine what the windows and doors tax was. Oh, if your house has a lot of windows and doors, it's a bigger house. You're wealthier. You can afford to pay more. That's how that tax works. And it was such a success that tax still exists in France. And like I said, even basic ass property taxes are a form of wealth tax that are good and should be utilized and bolstered.
Albeit not all. These failures are still used as an argument against the idea. What I want people to understand in this video is that the wealth tax project is bigger than just economics. It is a normative political project.
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned earlier, that like those wealth taxes that failed, that is the purpose that they serve, to fail and to then be used as an argument against wealth taxes as a category, right? They weren't designed to actually bring in meaningful revenue. They were designed so that the government could then kill it later, right? Does that make sense?
We do well to understand this before we overclaim a wealth tax's benefits or entirely misunderstand its purpose. But first, why all the hubbub about wealth? Wealth is a bit of a tricky concept. When most people think of billionaires, they imagine them having £1 billion in their bank account. But this is not
right, because most people are stupid.
The wealth of your average billionaire will consist mostly of shares and other financial assets, property and investments, plus any actual cash or bank deposits that they have. The reason Elon Musk became a trillionaire recently was because SpaceX's share price rose after its IPO. But he didn't receive a direct payment of $1 trillion or anything close. SpaceX's share price has now fallen back down, and he's no longer a trillionaire. Oh, and now it went back up, and he is a trillionaire since I recorded that. Fuck this whole thing. The whole thing does feel kind of fake.
And it is very fake. I actually wanted to, I guess now I can mention the thing I was thinking about. A wealth tax, the reason a wealth tax would be insufficient is because the problem it's meant to partially address is something as fundamental as wealth distribution, the distribution of resources between people across the world or across a country. Doesn't really matter. I mean no exaggeration when I say, if you set a uniform tax rate of 100% for everybody when it comes time for tax season, that would be a better system. One of the fundamental problem that we have is profiteering and wealth accumulation in economics, right? That's the issue. Any solution to these issues would have to, in some part, address that underlying issue. A 100% tax rate would not address the issue entirely, but it would fundamentally alter the purpose and the function of money. And that's really important. If Kayla were here, she'd be eating this up because I'm going to refer to my boy, John Maynard Keynes. The point of Keynesian economics, of much of Keynesian economics, revolves around the velocity of money and ensuring that capital and goods and services are being circulated around the economy in such a fashion that people get to enjoy them in a more or less equitable fashion. Right? Does that make sense? So, wealth accumulation is an inhibitor to that, because when wealth is accumulated and it has stopped moving, it's no longer in the economy, right? Wealth that's in the stock market is not circulating around in the economy. Wealth that is sitting in a speculative valuation in somebody's property in like Long Island is not a component part of the economy. Like, it's not being used in the economy. It's not circulating, right? The problem ultimately is that you can just acquire some form of wealth or income and then hold on to it forever. Money is an infinitely fungible resource. I know there's probably some NFT bros that got activated for me saying the word fungible, but ultimately they don't know what that word means, so I don't feel too bad about using it, right? Money is infinitely exchangeable and does not have an expiration date. But if you put an expiration date on that money, wealth accumulation is not only disincentivized, it's no longer possible, which is a super important thing to have, that incentive, that barrier to wealth accumulation, because it ultimately prevents inequality from existing long term. At least that's the theory, right? And it certainly would be a better system than one where an increasing proportion of the money you make is just infinitely gone from the economy forever, you know, or can only move upward. I missed the box. I'm going to use this. So, the sort of logical extension of Keynesian economics is to essentially have labor vouchers instead of money, which composes the backbone, I think, of Keynesian market socialism. You know, and like this is getting into very highly theoretical territory, but ultimately I think it would like really contribute to solving some of the economic problems that are caused or that cause wealth accumulation. I know I'm yapping, but like it's and I know it sounds big, but that's because it is big. And one of the biggest things that I think is super important about a 100% tax rate that effectively turns money from an infinitely hoardable resource to essentially labor vouchers is that because it's so simple, it's easy for people to understand the implications of it. Like, oh, you mean it would be illegal to save money? Yes, I do mean that. You would have to spend it all between tax seasons. Find something to spend your money on. I don't care what it is. Find something, right? For the most part, people do this anyway, with the exception of like a little bit of money that they save. They usually find ways to spend their disposable income. But with a 100% tax rate, now all income is disposable in the sense that it is transient. It's temporary. I can't help but think that is the only way that you're going to start working your way out of this hole. Not by a 100% wealth tax by name, but by reducing the permanence of money, if that makes sense. Because if money isn't permanent, then you can't accumulate it. If wealth isn't permanent, you can't accumulate it. And that's the issue, is the accumulation.
A point articulated well by comedian Trevor Noah.
People argue that you cannot tax billionaires on the shares that they hold in a company because it is an unrealized gain, right? So they go like, yeah, you're worth 300 billion, but we can't tax.
Yeah, it's a good thing then that there's such a thing as an unrealized gains tax. Like, literally, economists have said, like, yeah, what if we created an unrealized capital gains tax where your stock market valuation actually gets you taxed at a certain level? Like, oh, yeah, you own $100 million of shares in this company. Congratulations, unrealized capital gains tax is 10%. Pay us up fucking 10 million of that, buddy. Sell your shares. You know, that's what it would force people to do. You know, the stock market is a vehicle for the hoarding of this kind of wealth. So if people had to pay taxes on that wealth, they would have to realize that wealth in some capacity. You know, they'd have to. It creates a route by which money actually has to come back out of the stock market, and it's a very important element of any progressive tax bracket, because right now the stock market is just the infinite money glitch. You know. That's ultimately what it is. I'm going to chain this, I think.
You on those stocks because you haven't sold the shares, so you don't like have the money, right? But you're worth the money, but you don't have the money. And I understand the argument. They go like, no, you don't have it. It's just what it's worth, because it could also crash, and then you have nothing, so we can't tax you on it. Then I'm like, okay, I understand that. So you can't tax the people on a thing because they don't have it. It's just there. Okay, fine.
With wealth inequality, this point can be a little more insidious because the opacity of wealth is often used to obfuscate.
Yeah.
In fact, many ultra-wealthy individuals use their illiquid status to try to pretend that they're not actually that well off.
Yes.
They reason that if they don't...
That is why the stock market is functions as and is designed to be the infinite money glitch that it is. It's like, oh, well, I don't actually have that money, but conveniently, when it is convenient, they list that as wealth that they have access to, you know?
Don't have the money, then all of their wealth is basically an illusion, man. A recent example came from a Warsaw Gulch. A recent example came from a Wall Street Journal interview with Jimmy Donaldson, aka Mr. Beast.
Said you keep less than $1 million for yourself despite being a paper billionaire. Why do you choose to operate that way?
It's funny talking about my personal finances because no one ever believes anything I say. So, I mean, because they're like, you're a billionaire. I'm like, that's net worth. I have negative money right now. I'm borrowing money. That's how little money I have.
This is literally just buy, borrow, die. Mr. Beast is proving all of his critics correct uniformly in this exact moment. This is literally the process of capital reinvestment as described by Karl Marx and Adam Smith. It doesn't matter that you don't have the money on you. The fact of the matter is you have invested that into production, which means you had it at some point, and as a product of that production, you will earn it back. You will make a profit, which you then reinvest. Mr. Beast is a billionaire. He is just doing capitalism, right? It literally, what he's saying here is just the same as when people like Trump or Elon Musk say like, oh yeah, I don't take a salary. This is the same thing.
Technically, everyone watching this video has more money than me, and their banking.
And technically, everybody watching does have more money than Mr. Beast and every billionaire combined because what they're engaging is buy, borrow, die. But you have to understand, because that wealth is abstract and wealth is measured not just in money, but in control over resources, net worth valuations, and that sort of thing, they are billionaires. In practical terms, they have and control more wealth than anybody could ever dream of. It's literally inconceivable how much wealth they have at their disposal. You know, they're relying on you being economically illiterate to defend them. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of the many ways that billionaires try to desperately justify why it is deserved that they have the wealth that they do.
Yeah, if you subtract the equity value of my company, which doesn't buy me McDonald's in the morning or whatever.
He's borrowing money.
Yeah.
He must be poor, folks. Yet in that same interview, Mr. Beast says that he once paid $150,000 for a private jet to see his fiancée.
I was like, screw it. I'm just going to rent a private jet and fly to her because I really want to see her. But if I don't rent a PJ, I literally just can't make it work because the PJ flight's 8 hours, whereas like commercial would be like 19 there and back. It's like so much wasted time. And that was probably like $150,000.
With so little cash, where did the money come from, Jimmy? The answer is that wealthy individuals can use their wealth as collateral to get pretty much anything they want via special loans. A multi-billion...
Yep, when it becomes convenient to them, all of a sudden, they have access to the money. And you should pay attention because despite all their bluster about how they're in debt all the time, they have such easy access to wealth. It doesn't matter if their bank account might read in the red from like a balance sheet. Functionally, they have access to billions and billions of dollars in economic resources, right? It's wealth so large and grandiose that it actually eclipses the functionality and manifestations of wealth that regular people deal in who earn a wage or salary as their primary income.
$1 empire will be the assurance to a bank that they could get the money back if push comes
Thank
to shove.
fuck there's an invisible wall
there.
there.
The great thing for the bank is that the loan they make is quite a solid asset, so it makes their balance sheet look better. The bank effectively has a stake in the billionaire's empire. Therefore, these loans are lent at extremely low interest rates and are generally not intended to be paid back in the usual sense.
Yep.
You can refinance and refinance until you die.
Yeah, it's literally just like the infinite money glitch. It's all speculative. It's all bullshit. Ow. Fuck.
And when you die, you can bequeath your wealth to your family at a relatively low cost using other convenient quirks of the tax system that we won't get into.
There
For
you go.
this reason,
Buy,
Jimmy
borrow,
Donaldson will
die.
have easy access to large volumes of credit at special low billionaire interest rates and, crucially, on which he pays zero taxes. Borrowing is not taxable like income. Assuming a net worth of $1.5 billion, which is a conservative estimate, Mr. Beast's $150,000 private jet trip to his girlfriend doesn't look so big. It's actually 0.01% of his total assets. We can reasonably charge that if your wealth makes you able to borrow almost for free, which is basically just an income hack, then it should incur tax obligations. You know, the way it works for everyone else.
Yep.
Private jets may be one thing, but...
And as I explained earlier, the way you would do this is just say like, oh yeah, however much wealth you are capable of putting up in collateral or something like that, the valuation of your company, the value of your shares, we're going to add that up. That data is going to be shared with financial institutions, with the government, and so forth. You owe us a percentage of that money. That forces them to liquidate. That forces billionaires to and the wealthy to liquidate at least part of their holdings so that they can pay taxes.
Wealth is used as collateral for so much more than that. Huge loans can be made to fund new projects, philanthropic efforts, or to purchase other companies. This was symbolized by Elon Musk buying Twitter in 2022 for $44 billion. Incidentally, around the time he claimed he was couch surfing and homeless.
Then Elon Musk offers to buy Twitter, right?
Yeah.
He offers to buy it. And then he says, in his offer, he goes, I'm putting up my Tesla stock as collateral. Then I'm like, so you do have it?
Many billionaires are members of the $1 Club, where they take only that as a salary. This has included Steve Jobs of Apple, Larry Ellison of Oracle, Larry Page and Sergey Brin of Google, Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, Elon Musk of Tesla, Evan Spiegel of Snapchat, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, and David Filo of Yahoo. Jeff Bezos of Amazon takes a comparatively massive salary of $81,840, which he froze in 1998. Yet, he still has a yacht so big that a bridge in Rotterdam was going to be dismantled temporarily to allow it in, before he relented to public backlash. Hey, at least his salary is low. One way of thinking about this is that billionaires are too rich to need money. The economist Gabriel Zucman has documented the bizarre consequence.
Oh, hey, Gabriel Zucman mentioned. Zucman has done a lot of work with Piketty and Emmanuel Says as well.
Of this for the tax system. Most countries have progressive income tax systems, with the top 10% and even top 1% paying more than most as a proportion of their income. It's at the very, very top that tax obligations plummet. This is Mr. Beast borrowing money to fund his lifestyle instead of taking income from his company. It's the reason the $1 Club is a PR move at best and a tax avoidance move at worst.
Actually, sir, with our creative bookkeeping and corporate loopholes, we only pay $3 a year.
You're right. We're getting screwed.
Yeah, that's actually, like, that's a very real manifestation of the Marxian concept of differing relationships to the means of production. Like, the difference between somebody in that, like, $1 club, whatever, when you are too rich to need money, that is a signifier of your fundamental relationship to society and to economics being different than the average person, right? And that is, like, that relationship is what makes the difference between economic classes. And it doesn't usually come all at once. Even people who are in the middle class experience some version of this, but it is like, it is a wholly undesirable relationship. With the exception of, like, the most surface level desire to be a petty tyrant, I guess.
We should ignore attempts to obfuscate this issue by claiming wealth cannot be taxed at all. Complications like this are just the norm in actual policy design, after all. What, you want to tax every single worker at a rate which changes based on how much they're paid? How can you even know that, let alone enforce it? You want to not just guarantee but compel education for every child in the land. How will you reach them all? How will you find that many teachers? You think the government could just create rights to the electromagnetic spectrum out of nothing and sell them? Who is going to understand or obey rights to the sky? And so on. With that said, there are
all things that exist, by the way,
genuine complications with proposed wealth taxes. Fundamentally, what makes them different from most other taxes is that they tax a stock, not a flow. People hold wealth rather than being paid it. Flows like income are quite easy to tax.
Yeah, the fact that wealth will be taxed as a stock rather than a flow, stock like store shelves are stocked, that's actually not that complicated to get around. It's just that, like, it just incentivizes people to reevaluate their assets and holdings every year in time for tax season, right? So, like, oh, let's say you're worth $100 million, right? You have a net worth of $100 million, and that's all, like, in the stock market and speculative assets and things like that, right? That's what your evaluation says. So when tax season comes, you pay a 10% rate and you pay up 10 million, right? So now you have 90 million. If you assume that stays the same to the next year, you get another evaluation that says 90 million because you paid 10 million the previous year. Now this year you get taxed 10%. You only pay 9 million, right? So now you're left with 81. It's designed so that your wealth dwindles, right? That's the point, because it's an anti-wealth accumulation measure. It's actually quite easy to implement. It's just on its face very inconvenient for the wealthy. So they put up a large amount of resistance.
Because you can isolate the point at which a bank transfer is made, see the exact amount that is transferred, then tax a percentage of it. In contrast, wealth is not recorded as concretely, so it has to be estimated. This doesn't make taxing it impossible. There are examples of taxes based on assets, like council tax in the UK, but it is much less commonly done in our current system, and that's something to bear in mind.
Yeah.
There are two main issues with trying to tax wealth in practice. Issues which any serious discussion of a wealth tax does have to reckon with. First, the rich's assets are not.
Fundamentally, I don't like as much that they're sort of talking about this like an unknown quantity, because it's really not, right? Like, wealth taxes would look different today, but that's because wealth looks different today. You know, the inheritance tax is a form of wealth tax. It's left over from a time when people's wealth was mostly gotten from inheritance, as opposed to, like, stock market fuckery and insider trading.
Liquid, meaning they cannot be transferred from one person to another easily as a form of payment. Tax authorities won't typically accept shares or property as payment, only currency. In many cases, assets will have to be sold by the wealthy to pay their taxes.
That's the point, by the way. This isn't a complication. That's the point, right? Oh, illiquid assets can't be used as payment. Yeah, That's the purpose of a wealth tax. The problem of wealth accumulation is that wealth is hoarded in very illiquid forms, where it stays static and doesn't move and doesn't contribute to anything, right? Except for the wholesale increasing of the dragon's hoard. The point of a wealth tax on wealth that is not liquid is that it forces you to transfer that wealth into something more liquid so that you can pay up. That's not a bug. That's the feature. That's not a complication. That's the thing that we want to do. You know, so many billions upon billions, trillions of dollars are hidden in offshore accounts, in speculative assets, in tax loopholes, donations that are given to charity, loans, you know, loan collateral and debt and things like that, that aren't easily measurable in terms of just how many dollar bills, right? Like, oh yeah, I own a property that's worth 20 million, you know, and that's like my portfolio of wealth. I can't pay taxes in the form of that $20 million property, so I have to come up with $2 million for like a 10% tax. You better fucking sell that building. That's the point. The problem isn't just the number is too big on their screen. The problem is what that number represents is that they control so much of society, right? They have to give up that control in order to abide by the law that a wealth tax would be. You know? Piketty talks about this at length in his volumes of Capital. I don't know. I don't really like that that's framed as a complication. That's not a complication. That's the objective. That's the point.
One legitimate fear is that taxing people with lots of assets but little money, such as retirees, could force them to sell their houses. Related.
Yeah, that's not a problem with the tax itself, though. That's a problem with the way we treat housing. That's the issue is that, like, your house is treated as private property that is subject to a property tax and contributes to speculative valuation. These have to be dealt with hand in hand. Also, for number 2, that's just a skill issue, not a real problem. Oh no, it's highly variable, the valuation that I might have on this, like, property. Damn, sucks to suck. Fuck you. The correct answer there is fuck you. The correct answer to people having a wealth tax on their home and shit, then just don't tax people on their primary residence. Easy. Or that kind of wealth tax. Just don't have that kind of wealth tax apply to people's primary residence. And don't treat primary residences as a speculative asset. Build so much housing that it becomes a depreciating asset. Take it out of the hands of private developers and private homeowners. Put it in the hands of the public sector. You know, make it something that you can't buy or sell. Like, could I rightly buy or sell the sidewalk in front of my apartment building? No, that shit's not for sale, right? Could I rightly buy or sell a street lamp? No. So then why can you rightly buy a house? Why can you buy or sell a house, right? Everybody knows that it'd be stupid if, like, somebody purchased and sold a sidewalk or a stretch of road. I mean, not that that hasn't been done. There are private, like, toll roads, but those are stupid as fuck, you know? I just fucking hate land ownership, and I hate the unnecessary capitulations that people make to land and real estate as speculative assets rather than fucking places where you live. You know? I don't know. I'm getting a little bit animated, but ultimately that comes down to a difference in how I would frame this. Nonetheless, this has been an interesting discussion so far, and, like, I think both of us would agree that the imperative for a wealth tax is very high. Like, very, very high. Because wealth inequality is really bad. Really, really bad. Anyways. That's enough of that. 12 and a half minutes in. Okay, I'm going to close that. and nobody's watching. Who the fuck cares? I had fun. That's what matters. I am going to find somebody to raid, I think, if I can. And I'll finish this off next time. Oh shit, Embrez is here. What's up, Embrez? I was just reacting to Unlearning Economics. Stop by next time if you're interested in more of that. I do fancy myself an amateur economist. Anyways, Mango is live on some Rivals of Ether. He recently, I think, celebrated a year sober. Congrats to him. So I'm gonna go raid him. I will see y'all next time. There we go. Raid. Wealth tax won't work the way you think. Let's set this up. Good. Anyways, we back, baby. We were at about 12:30. Let us now continue where we left off with Unlearning Economics. In light of what I've talked about, a wealth tax, even if you set a wealth tax at like 100% to render money entirely temporary, like I was talking about, that would still not fix the issue, I think. It's something, but it's like, in light of the crisis we're facing, it's like a drop in the bucket. So
Most of these assets have variable value. If you tried to confiscate all of Jeff Bezos' Amazon shares, the value of those shares would fall and you would be left with less than you'd hoped. After all, those same shares once changed $13 billion in a single day. Even more challenging are the large number of...
Okay, well, here's the thing, though, is that, like, you don't really care that it's less than you hoped. You just care that, like, that much abstract power over the company or resources is now out of one person's hands and now available for redistribution. Even if the number itself is like somewhat smaller than you thought, you can always plan for that. That's entirely possible. It's like, oh yeah, our projection is we might get this much, but you don't fucking plan based on a preliminary projection. You plan based on the real number once you have it, you know? At least I should hope you do anyway. If there are, if people plan based on like a loose projection, I feel like that's kind of dumb. Like, not a good idea. My shit driving has negative consequences for other racers. You love to see it. Very funny. Oh dang, Rachel hit the swamp immediately.
things wealthy people own that do not have publicly accessible values like unlisted companies, private equity stakes, and art. Total wealth is inherently difficult to measure, and in one sense, there's no there there.
Fairy dust. It doesn't exist.
You'd also have to consider liabilities as well as assets. Any reasonable wealth tax would be on net wealth, assets minus liabilities, to avoid taxing your average mortgaged homeowner at a high rate, for example.
Well, no. A wealth tax would be on portfolios. I feel like one of the essential things that people miss with a wealth tax is they keep taking these concepts in a vacuum. A wealth tax should be implemented along with like broad scale decommodification of essential resources so that you're not actually taxing homeowners. In fact, what you could do, this would exempt some people with very large houses, but if you created a wealth tax as distinct from property taxes that people already have to pay, you could simply exempt people's primary residences, right? So that way, even if a tax is quote unquote too much for somebody to pay, the worst they would have to do is sell a second house that they own, you know? Meanwhile, your regular home would just be subject to garden variety property taxes. Or better yet, you could treat homes the way you treat roads and sidewalks, in that they're all public property, and you can't own the fucking sidewalk. You can't own the like, imagine if you say, yeah, I own this railroad. Like, the fuck? No, you don't. Like, I know rail is privatized in the United States and in a lot of places, but it's like, oh yeah, I own these power lines. No, you literally, that you can't just fucking do that. I'm goated. Yeah, there's some things that literally, because of their presence, like, at scale, they literally just can't be owned by individuals. Not even like, oh, they shouldn't be allowed to be. No, it's just, like, not possible in a practical sense. Even if, like, you come up with some way that on paper they are.
Eagle-eyed viewers might worry that the wealthy can borrow to dodge this too, as they do with income tax, but most borrowing is done to acquire an asset, so the net position is ambiguous.
Oh, that one's easy. Just make loaning money illegal. Oh, fuck. I hate when this happens. Craziest sand hop of all time, just about. I had fucking one hand off of the fucking controller when I did that. I'm goated. Okay, what's the mini player? I think it's I. There we go.
Having said that, the wealthy borrowing to increase their liabilities to avoid a wealth tax would be a problem in some cases for sure. In conclusion,
indeed, and that's why you just need to abolish the practice of loaning money. Like, you cannot do that. 3 for 3, baby. I might want to clip that, like, crazy-ass sand hop where I didn't even have both hands on the controller. Just because I'm fucking schnice with it. Oh, no. Oh, that's bad. That's, like, pretty bad. I got a mushroom. That's nice. I don't want to alarm you, but we can do more than one thing. That's true. That is true. Yeah, not to alarm people who say, well, this policy doesn't literally fix all of these problems. Are you aware that it's possible to do more than one thing ever? Has it occurred to you? Of course, to neoliberals, this is a radical revolutionary concept that they would never even deign to consider. But yeah.
Conclusion, we live in a society. So what do we do? How do we get our hands on the precious, precious assets of the wealthy? There are plenty of distinct...
That pun is so fucking British. The Three Musk Ideas is a pun on the Three Musketeers. But that only sounds like Musketeers if you speak a non-rhotic dialect of English. It basically, Musk Ideas only sounds like Musketeers if you're speaking like Bostonian or English. You know? They act like Social Democrat would be murdered already, even though they haven't done much yet. Yeah. I think that happened to JoJo's, where there are jokes meant for Japanese that don't translate well. Yeah. Like the one where he goes, and it Hansu maru mi or something, and it means your underwear is showing.
Ideas for a wealth tax.
It was the greatest joke I've ever seen.
Three main proposals, which will help us to iron out the most important features of the policy, such as how high it is, who it applies to, how often it is repeated, and how much it will annoy economists. Early in COVID-19 in the UK, there was
how much it will annoy economists. Okay, hot take. How much it annoys economists is an inverse of the factor you would think it is. If it annoys economists, we should do it more. because, you know, even though, like I've said, economics as a field has improved greatly since the 1980s and 90s when they were all on that neoliberalism type shit, there's still some fucking insufferable neolibs, you know? Like, they are still like that. How did I not die there? The world may never know. But, you know, economists literally fucking base a lot of their identity around being, like, smart boys and girls, mostly boys, who understand the economy, TM. And so you should just, like, annoy them as hard as possible. Yeah, that's true. I've fucking exercise and aura farming. Had too much aura to get hit there.
To pay for this once-in-a-lifetime catastrophe, or so we thought at the time. The thinking went that everyone should bear the burden, and those with the broadest shoulders should bear the biggest burden. Because it was about managing a health emergency, this tax was supposed to be sizable and, crucially, a one-off. In the chaos of 2020, as the UK government seriously considered a wealth tax to fund pandemic-era expenses, a group of learned academics...
Everybody knew, even at the time, everybody knew that that was a bad idea, and the liberals pretended that it wasn't, and now the left has been, like, vindicated for the 9 millionth time. They did do some, like, pretty radical, like, in the scope of what is now considered politically acceptable, some pretty radical, like, social democratic reforms to get countries through COVID, because it was, like, exactly the kind of pandemic we had been preparing for. And sometimes that included things like enhanced unemployment benefits, a wealth tax. Unfortunately, these things were one-offs. They demonstrated to the world, governments, the powerful, like, political classes demonstrated to the world, if we felt like it, we could just make everything better for no consequence. And they did it as a one-off, and then they rescinded all of that post-COVID. They took it all back. All those wealth taxes, gone. That enhanced unemployment, gone. The child tax credit that lifted something like 40 to 50% of children out of poverty in America, gone. Because they didn't feel like it. They wish they could wipe everyone's memories of it. Yes, they do. In fact, they've been trying to, just by not talking about it, ever. That's why they never talk about, like, anything beyond the stock market when it comes to economics. They want you to think that's all the economy is. But this was objectively a massive mistake in rescinding these policies, but they didn't care.
Academics convened to study the proposal intensively. The result? A panel 4 years later, where the authors of several lengthy reports refused to commit concretely to anything.
I fucking hate academics sometimes. Whoever said in the 90s, whoever was that politician famous for saying, oh, you know, mealy-mouthed academics, they were fucking cooking. Because academics will never fucking commit to having any sort of political prescription in their professional capacity. Like, brother, your job is to inform policy decisions. So fucking inform them. You know? Like, here's fucking 50 pages of evidence that wealth taxes are good and we should do them, and they help to reduce the inequality in society, even though they have some, like, kinks that you can work out later. And then they'll, like, they'll conclude it by saying, like, well, I don't really know, guys. I don't know if we should do this. It's like, fucking, what do you need? What do you need? Legitimately. Ah, I took a super wide line. I'm just gonna throw that back, and I'll throw this over there. Yeah, like, genuinely, I think that it like, tenure was a fucking mistake. Because some of these conclusions are so bad, like, some of this work, like, the data collection is really good, but then some of these conclusions are so obviously unscientific that it should cost you your job as an economist. Like, you should not get to keep being an economist, especially a respected economist in the field, if you do a fucking massive years-long project on wealth taxes, and then you report on it, and your report is, I don't know, we need to study this more. Bitch, you had 4 years. And that's not just 4 years to come up with new data. That's 4 years to come up with data that already exists on taxes that are similar in nature. Legitimately, the perception that you have to be unbiased all the time as a social scientist, or as a scientist in general, is one of the biggest like ankle weights on the scientific community, because they'll never conclude anything meaningful unless you're a physicist, in which case a lot of times your findings don't directly have political implications. That's the only time they're ever comfortable concluding anything. Motherfucker, why do you think you're studying things? It's to impact the world positively. You are making the world worse by refusing to commit to a position that you and I both know is true. And if by some miracle academics actually don't know how to read their own data, which is possible. I've read more than enough academic studies and books in my day to know that sometimes they actually don't fucking know how to read their own data. Then I'm sorry, you're just stupid and shouldn't be allowed to have your PhD. You, like, legitimately, you should have to be able to read your own data in a way that is politically literate and maps relevantly to the current socio-political climate. Because the point of research is to improve the human condition. It's like an engineer not knowing how they built something. Yeah, it's like an engineer following the instructions on how to build something. It's like, oh yeah, well this goes here because of this, blah, 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 blah. And then they've built it, and then they can't fucking begin to tell you how they built it. Or like they shy away from explaining anything about the thing that they've built. Or like they don't know what it does. It's like, it's pathetic. It's honestly pathetic. And I actually, like, this is why I fucking mention Thomas Piketty all the time. He's the only fucking economist I've seen that will actually commit to saying, yeah, we should probably do this. By the way, here's 100 years of data backing it up. You know? Like, he didn't even need that much data, but he just did that. Like, I'm convinced that Thomas Piketty, Emmanuel Saez, and Gabriel Zucman gathered all of that data about, like, wealth inequality throughout history, throughout mostly, like, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, just to Orifarm for a thing they already knew. You know? Because they're like that, I guess. You can pass. Awesome. Ugh.
Even their own headline proposal.
The main headline proposal of the Wealth Tax Commission was for 5%, in your first instance, one-off wealth tax to be paid over 5 years. So what led you?
Why is it a one-off? Why is it a one-off? Why couldn't it be, if it's a pilot, like a lot of experiments in social science will do what's called a pilot, where it's like we're test driving this thing before we're absolutely sure of the consequences it could have. Why are you doing it as a one-off? That's just bad science. Why are you doing it as a one-off over 5 years? Why are you not doing it once per year over 5 years, the way normal fucking taxes work? Like you pay every year and shit, you know? Jesus. This place? They're scared of what they might find. Yes, they probably are. They're a bunch of whiny, scared piss babies. Academics, and especially economists. Economists are the worst with this. Like, they're, in fact, I think it's economists, and then archaeologists below that. Those are the two worst in terms of being afraid to commit to their own findings, or like so afraid of saying anything that they forget how to read their own data. Then anthropologists right there with archaeologists. And then again, it's like 10 tiers of separation. And then sociologists are the ones most comfortable with fucking letting it rock. You know? From what I've read of sociologists, anyway.
You to that, Emma, I'm going to ask you first. What led you to that conclusion?
Well, it was one thing we could possibly agree on, because we disagreed on quite a lot.
Like, a one-off wealth tax is just bad data collection. You only get one data point, you know? You only get data from 1 year, one instance of the tax happening. You don't get to see what kind of knock-on effects it has, what it'll do over time. They literally did a one-off wealth tax because they didn't want to do a wealth tax. That's the only reason you would do a one-off. 5 years is not a ton of data from a social scientific perspective, but it's enough to draw a trend. It's enough to get a glimpse at what kind of knock-on effects that a policy could have. If you were interested in data collection and seeing whether a wealth tax was feasible, even though we fucking know that it is already, you would do it once a year for 5 years. You would not do it as a one-off. I don't care what kind of arguments that you could potentially make for, well, here's why you do it as a one-off. I don't care. It ultimately boils down to the fact that you're, like, bitch-ass scared of what the implications could be. Like, these people have no fucking conception of how desperate the socio-political situation is. You cannot afford to be that scared, motherfucker. The fucking fate of society is in your hands. You don't get to be scared like that. Gotron, you joke, but that is literally what the field of economics looked like 30 to 50 years ago. Like, they were calling shit like the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia communism because the state did things. They still call China socialism and communism because the state does things, you know? And then somehow magically the state doing things in the case of the United States either doesn't count as communism when it's something that they like, or the moment it does something that they don't like, now it counts as communism. These people are so fucking unserious. In their insistence that they appear so serious and reserved, they lose all of their fucking credibility because they, like, never exercise their authority. They never attempt to make any sort of statement with the fucking academic authority and analysis that I know that they're capable of. With the exceptions of Thomas Piketty, Emmanuel Says, Gabriel Zucman, and fucking Unlearning Economics. The only real economists in the world. Jesus. Oh! That ending is clip-worthy. Clip that shit. Man, this session really has been me aura farming while I crash out at the fucking state of the world.
But actually, I don't think we positively recommended a one-off wealth tax. We said if you are going to raise taxes, this is one way you could do it.
This panel was genuinely helpful for me. But
again, like, why? If you're going to raise taxes, we recommend you do a one-off tax that you don't repeat. Excuse me?
Because it clarified a few things, particularly the importance of whether the tax was repeated or a one-off.
Will you look at those morons? I paid my taxes over a year ago.
Economists reason that a repeated wealth tax would have compounding behavioral effects.
Yeah, that's why you want to figure out the effects of a compounding wealth, like a wealth tax over time. That's exactly the reason that you don't do it as a one-off. That's why you implement it over a period of several years, because you want to see exactly what the knock-on effects are. What the these people are afraid of their own goddamn shadow.
If you're having 1/10 of your wealth confiscated every year, then ultimately, why bother holding any at all?
Yes, that is the point. Congratulations. That's the point of a wealth tax. Wealth is not meant to be something permanently accumulable.
Asset values from property to shares would decline massively, and people would be reluctant to build wealth in the first place.
That's the point. You don't want society to just be building wealth. No, motherfucker, you don't build wealth. You build buildings for people to use and look at and say, ooh, pretty, and to live in. that, like, fuck building wealth. Oh my fucking god. Like, people won't invest if you do a wealth tax. Yeah, then fuck them. Like, oh, but the share prices will decrease. People will stop speculating, like, building for speculative purposes. Good! I don't want them doing that. We don't want them doing that! That's what fucking destroyed society to begin with!
In addition, wealthy people have much more to gain from moving their wealth around and reclassifying it to avoid the tax. This isn't as true if you're sure it's just a one-off and...
This is more valid than the other one, but this has still been proven to be fake. Capital flight, unless you are in the EU and the potential countries that you could do capital flight to are other EU states, capital flight is not a real thing, right? The EU and America are unique in this respect because in America you have tax havens like Delaware, and in the EU you have tax havens like Cyprus, Luxembourg, and Monaco, I think. But if you're in a country like, I don't know, what's a European country that's not an EU member, right? Finland. If you are a wealthy person in Finland, if you're a wealthy person in Russia, say, I know, fat chance of this ever happening in Russia, right? But like, work with me here. If you're in a country that doesn't have such a specific wealth tax haven set up already, that doesn't happen. You know, and in fact, the aforementioned real economists, Piketty, Sayes, and Zuckman, foresaw this issue, and they were like, yeah, we can actually, like, put a tax on offshore accounts and tie it to the nationality of the person rather than the location of their wealth, right? Like, that's a way to potentially put a, albeit minuscule, tax on, like, offshore holdings, so you can at least get a picture of how much wealth people have. And you should just design a tax that's like, you can't flee this tax by putting your wealth somewhere else because it's still under your name. You are a citizen of this country, therefore you have to pay taxes on that wealth to this country. You know? So, like, this gets around the tax haven issue as well, in some rudimentary sense. If you're a resident of the state of New York, right? You live in the state of New York, that's where your primary legal residence is. And you try to put your wealth in Delaware, you try to, like, buy up some properties in Delaware. Sure, maybe you pay, like, Delaware property taxes, but nice fucking try, bucko. You don't get to dodge the New York wealth tax. You still have to pay that wealth tax to the state of New York because you live in New York. You know, you don't pay the non-existent wealth tax that Delaware has or whatever. You know what I mean? They talk about that in Capital in the 21st Century and Capital and Ideology. There are ways to resolve this pretty easily in all, like, in, like, the grand scheme of things. People view becoming rich like you're ascending to godhood. Yes, fundamentally they do. They believe that, like, it should become some sort of immutable status where you get to now exist above and beyond society. But, sorry. No, actually.
Not to be repeated lightly. A one-off is also difficult to avoid or evade because it's applied to your wealth historically. We may not like these behavioural responses, but we can't eliminate them entirely, especially with something as amorphous.
If you don't, again, it's like, it's one of those things, if you don't like the behavioural responses, that's all the more reason to implement the tax as not a one-off, so you get a better picture of what those behavioral responses look like. And now you actually have data as several points of reference to plan how you respond to those responses, right? What they're doing, they're acting as though they're not sure they even want rich people to pay more in taxes, right? They're acting like they don't actually know what they want the prior assumption to be. Like, oh, is it good that the government have money that they can spend on things? I don't know. Is it? Is it good for a fucking country to be infinitely in debt because it has no tax base? I think that's worse, actually. You have to have some sort of priority or some sort of philosophical prior going into one of these studies, right? The only reason you would act so unsure and do a one-off is if you weren't sure that good things were good, right? where it's like, okay, we're trying to achieve this end for a society. It's like the economists doing this just don't even know what they want to do, you know? Like, if this has the actual urgency that we all know it has, then what they should be doing is trying to gather all the data that they can, you know? It probably is a contradiction in their beliefs. Ultimately, I believe it's a product of what I mentioned earlier, where in an effort to retain their reserved and serious demeanor that they put on as a sort of screen that gives them legitimacy, they avoid ever saying anything and act like they don't have philosophical priors. They act like robots. You know, too many times I've read studies that are like this, that will, you know, this is in anthropology, but I've read economists that behave like this as well. More specifically in anthropology, I've read anthropologists that will excuse or play down the harms of things like female genital mutilation because they're afraid of passing judgment on a non-Western culture. Bitch, your priors about, like, bad things being bad don't go away when you're talking about sub-Saharan Africa versus, like, Western Europe. That's kind of the point.
And ethereal as net wealth. This is something that even highly progressive pro-tax economists like Richard Murphy tend to agree on, so it's worth taking seriously.
The case for the one-off wealth tax, the reason economists like the idea of one-off taxes, is if you can explain why there's a specific circumstance that's unusual, that's kind of credible.
Yes, we should. We should have long since dispensed with the notion that it's possible to have an unbiased individual. People should accept their biases and understand them. And sure, like, there are certain biases that you would want to overcome, right? There are biases that are bad, but biases are a part of what make us human. You don't get good data by pretending your biases don't exist. In fact, that's how you get bad data. Again, I've read enough studies to know what this looks like. You get good data when you write your bias openly into the paper and honestly into the paper so that people can read your bias and understand it up front and therefore read around it if the time ever comes. That helps people understand your data set better. I have experience with this. I have written like this a little while ago, about a month or two ago. I revisited some of my old papers from college, and some of the papers that I wrote were like better than other academic papers from real professionals that I've read, because, like, I don't remember a lot about how I wrote these papers, to be honest, but, like, rereading them, I was like, oh wow, the bias that I have here is actually super clear. I can see how my opinions have changed, and I can see the ways that this bias would or wouldn't potentially affect the data that I'm trying to refer to or trying to use here. So I can get, like, an understanding of what this data is meant to be for, you know, how it might have been massaged, because every academic does that. The worst part is just when they pretend that they don't, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm going into this archaeological research with the intention of understanding feudal society a little bit better, insofar as the social structures of feudal hierarchies in metropolitan areas, because that is the direction that society seems to be headed today in a socioeconomic sense. And if that is the bed we are about to lie in, we need to understand how it is made. That was like the introduction or like introductory thesis to the paper. And I was like, damn, okay. And so you can read it with that in mind and sort of get an understanding of my interpretive lens as I'm looking at the limited information that I'm able to find on, you know, feudal area, like, or feudal era, Ancien Régime France, right? Yes, everybody should have a bias towards human happiness and flourishing and the world being better, you know? That is a bias. Wanting good things because they're good is a bias. Everybody has that, presumably. Oh, he tried to bump me.
Then what you can avoid is the negative behavioral effects that come with taxes. So all taxes change behavior. sometimes you want that. You tax carbon because you want people not to emit carbon. But you also tax income, and that does have some effects on people's willingness to work. So the concern with a tax on...
No, this is counterfactual. That's false. What he's saying has been... I've literally read the research that specifically disproves that statement. When you raise taxes, it does not change people's willingness to work. You know? Like, oh, well, I was gonna go to work and, like, have a job, but now I've discovered that 30% of my income will be taxed by income taxes rather than 25%. So now I won't. That doesn't happen. That's fake. That's not real. Yeah, like, oh, taxes are high. Let me just no longer participate in economic activity that's responsible for giving me a stream of income that would, of course, then be subject to taxes, and, like, not have money to pay for housing or food. That's fake. That doesn't happen. That's not borne out in the data. I don't know who this guy is, but he's talking some mad shit right now.
Wealth is that you might affect willingness to save. Maybe we'll come back to that point.
Willingness to save, it does affect slightly more, but not willingness to work.
But with a one-off wealth tax, you don't...
It like, because it affects marginally how much disposable income you have, it can affect how much money people save at the end of each, like, paycheck cycle. But they're entirely missing the point, many economists do, entirely missing the point of what you fucking use taxes for. Taxes don't just go into the ether and you never see them again. Taxes are paid to government coffers, and then the government spends that money on shit so you don't have to spend your money on it otherwise. It's a way of aggregating costs that we all have to bear to live in society, so that for any one person, those costs are greatly lesser or eliminated entirely. America and Europe are perfect contradictory examples of this. In America, taxes are on average much lower than in Europe, in many European countries. We do not have universal healthcare. So while incomes, take-home pays, are much higher in America on average, people have been struggling much more with affordability in America, because as a result of tax money not being spent on these essential services in a capacity that would make them free at the point of use, people can't afford them. Meanwhile, in Europe, because the government uses that tax revenue on social services like medicine, medical care, schooling, more so than America does, and things like that, people in Europe, even though they are struggling, are not struggling as badly as people in America, because there are certain costs that Americans have to bear at an individual level that Europeans just don't. That's how taxes work. There is literally, I have read the theory that first, like, posed the possibility, hey, what if we use these taxes to, like, reinvest in society and these social services so that the peasantry doesn't, like, fucking starve every winter? That theory was written in the fucking 1760s. This is a known quantity. That he's just wrong.
Get the opportunity to change your historic decisions about saving, because you made them up to now, and beyond this point, any changes you make in your behaviour won't have any effect on the amount of tax you owe.
The positive side of this is that a one-off...
Like, this is, what he's saying is only correct if you are taking the concept of taxes completely in a vacuum, in that, like, oh, it's money you pay to the government and then it just goes nowhere after that. Basically, they're treating taxes like an upward transfer of wealth into the stock market or the wealthy, where it's like the government takes it and then it just sits in the coffers and they never spend it on anything that you get to use. You act like tax is an endless pit where you shove money in for no good reason. Yeah, that's in taking taxation in a vacuum. That is what these economists are doing. When you're talking about taxes, you cannot evit the fact that taxes are then spent on social services that would ordinarily be much more expensive in the aggregate if people were forced to try to make those expenses on an individual basis, right? Yeah, no, this guy is an economist. He's done research. He should know better. But I guess he doesn't.
Off tax could be at a much higher.
Like, the argument, understand, like, I was talking, this video is about wealth taxes, and what I offered was talking points about, like, taxes in general, because that's the argument that he made. The real question is, do you think he's doing it on purpose? Subconsciously, perhaps. It's I was talking about earlier, they're so mealy-mouthed, they're afraid to commit to anything other than what's currently happening. It's a product of that. Intentional or not, like consciously intentional or not, the effect is the same. It's a capitulation to capital. Like, oh, we can't raise taxes because then we would get less tax revenue somehow. People would struggle more somehow. Not if you were fucking spending the money like what taxes are for, you know? God, I fucking hate economists so much. Every time an economist opens their mouth, I hate them more. I didn't think it was possible, but it's happening.
And start from a much lower threshold, so it applies to more people. The Commission concluded that for the UK, a 5% one-off wealth tax on assets over £500,000 would raise £250 billion, which for context,
damn, that's pretty
was around
good.
The estimated number for total pandemic spending at the time. In other words, a serious inquiry by skeptical experts concluded that a wealth tax could raise a sizable amount 5 years ago. So,
and this is like, and by the way, these are the guys that I was just talking shit about. Even their fucking anti-tax, like, soft libertarian asses who are afraid to say anything had to conclude, like, oh shit, this singular one-off wealth tax would raise £250 billion if you just imposed, yeah, this is a 5% tax on all assets you own above £500,000. You know, £1 being worth slightly more than $1. So it'd be maybe about $550,000 to $600,000, right? You tax that at 5%, you get like £250 billion. That's like almost $300 billion. What are you playing? Mario Kart Wii. It's fun. Yeah, it's very, like, listening to economists talk like this is very, very blackpilling. I will readily acknowledge that.
why haven't we done it?
But
Vested interests are the...
it can also be very white-pilling, very hope-inspiring, because even, like, the economists, like, loading so much anti-tax bias into all of their research. Hello, Kayla. Welcome back. Even, like, with the economists, loading all of this anti-tax bias into their research. And they could not conclude anything other than this would actually solve all of our problems and, like, raise a fuckload of money. You know? US asshole lost against Belgium. That's true. They sort of... I haven't been watching the World Cup, but I did see that the United States lost after President Trump personally intervened, did some fucking quid pro quo corruption bullshit to get a red card rescinded from one of the US players. Which is really, really funny. I think that's like the perfect way for the US to lose. Cheated and still lost. Anyways, sorry, back to the video.
In place. Iceland could bring in a one-off wealth tax quickly after the financial crash because they'd only recently had a permanent one, so the machinery to value everyone was still there. In the UK, we did a one-off windfall on oil and gas companies during the pandemic because we already had the infrastructure in place for corporation tax. Given the power of the oil and gas lobbies, it's fair to say that at least part of the reason for not choosing the wealth tax was simple expediency.
Yeah, it is fascinating for, like, to find out what kinds of, like, specific words some languages have or don't have. Also, yeah, it's a shame they didn't bring that up earlier. I feel like that was the concern about whether or not certain machinery already exists or would need to be newly constructed is a concern they should have brought up earlier, but didn't for some reason.
Obedience. So that was the first of the three proposals, a big, one-off wealth tax designed to raise a sizable amount of revenue for emergencies. Interestingly, this was proposed before wealth inequality became the issue in the economy. It was before the spike in the fortunes of tech billionaires during the pandemic, before people noticed that income inequality wasn't really the issue anymore, and before Gary's economics overtook my subscriber count. The main problem was that it needed to be implemented quickly, but we lacked the infrastructure to do so. The emergency passed, and the rationale for
that is also a valid concern for wealth taxes. It's just that like it might not be possible to implement them as fast as they need to be implemented. Want to hear what this person's conclusion is? I am interested to hear that too. I have a feeling that they would conclude something like a little bit more middle of the road than I might. But nonetheless, I do know that they're pro, like, unlearning economics is a socialist in some capacity. I don't know if they necessarily self-describe as such anymore, but they are left-wing, and they are pro-good things, which includes wealth tax. It's just their conclusion might be dictated on whether or not they think it's like possible to do it. I don't know.
For this type of wealth tax with it. Since then, the debate has moved on to a more general wealth tax, designed not so much to raise masses of revenue, but to level the playing field.
So old liberal? Yes, kind of like a classical liberal or social democrat, or Adam Smith types.
On a permanent basis. Gabriel Zuckman's 2024 proposal was designed to combat the kind of regressive tax system we have right now. The figure I quoted earlier, showing how the very rich basically pay no tax.
Like, when I tell you that, like, modern liberals basically do not resemble Enlightenment liberals, Unlearning Economics and myself are much closer, particularly Unlearning Economics, much closer to what an Enlightenment liberal might look or sound like if they were placed in modern economics, I suppose, because their priority is market, like basically they view the market as a valid way to allocate resources, but they are not in favor of unrestricted unregulated markets, because ultimately at the end of the day, the reason that they support markets is because it helps meet people's needs, and that's the priority more than anything.
Tax was from Zuckman's paper. Zuckman also shows how a 2% tax on centimillionaires and above would be enough to roughly counteract the current tendency for tax obligations at the very top of the distribution to decline. Average tax rates would be roughly similar by income group, with a global 2% wealth tax above $100 million. Zuckman calculates that, globally, this would raise over $300 billion, which is roughly in line with recent calculations for the amount needed to end extreme poverty.
Okay. That's still okay. I will say this. 300 billion is a pretty small number in terms of the global economy. Keep in mind, the American GDP, last I checked, is about 30 trillion, which is about 100 times as much as 300 billion. The issue, I guess, is that, like, again, it's awfully modest for the problem that you're trying to chip at by implementing a wealth tax. 300 billion is a start, but the fact that it's dispersed worldwide means that a lot of that money, especially if you don't change the system by which wealth is quote unquote created, like extracted and distributed, a lot of that 300 billion that could be raised by that wealth tax, as modest as it is, runs the risk of going back into that speculative cycle, which is not a problem with the tax itself. Rather, it's a problem with the tax not going far enough, and it's a problem with other systemic changes, not by implication, not being made.
So the "you could end poverty rather than being a trillionaire" placards are more correct than you might think. Note that this is a modest proposal in some ways. It only applies to extremely wealthy people, and it's only 2% above that level.
Okay, yeah. I'm glad that he acknowledges that, like, this is a very modest version of this proposal, because this is only a 2% wealth tax on above, like, a certain threshold.
Are more correct than you might think. Note that this is a modest proposal in some ways. It only applies to extremely wealthy people, and it's only 2% above that level, a small base and a middling rate compared to other proposals out there. It merely has the aim of making centimillionaires and above pay roughly as much tax as the rest of us as a proportion of their income, which is an eminently reasonable thing to want.
Yeah,
Zuckman's
I would even say it's unreasonably charitable, right? Like, if that's like paying the same proportion of your income in taxes is what we call a regressive tax. You know, let's say the effective tax rate for all combined taxes, right? There are many different kinds of taxes. Let's say the effective combined tax rate in a given society is something like 50 to 60%, right? Like decently high taxes, you got your income tax, you got your property tax, you got like, I don't know, there are other kinds of taxes too, but like that's where you get really into the weeds on like tax policy and shit. And that comes out to roughly 60% of your yearly income or like your wealth, whatever it is, right? That 60% is going to hurt a lot more for somebody making $50,000 a year than it will for somebody making $500,000 a year. And for both of them, it's going to hurt a lot more than somebody making $5 million or $50 million or $5 billion a year. Philosophy at school. I did take one philosophy class with possibly the coolest professor I've ever met. But no, my journey getting into politics started about 9 to 10 years ago when I was 16 and saw that like Donald Trump was had just won the election, and I was worried about the consequences that could have for people I knew who were immigrant families and in my neighborhood knew growing up, as well as my mom, because you know, my mom had been subject to a lot of bullshit after 9/11, as have a lot of people, and I was worried that it would get worse, you know. So I do look like my mom. But even before that, I grew up in the DC area, so growing up in an area like that, you're relatively exposed to politics as a concept pretty early on. Like, I learned about, like, what the presidency was, and that one of the first things I learned about politically in my life was that America was at war with Iraq. And I was like, what? Why? NYC, DC, Washington, DC. I grew up in the DC area. I only fucking wish I grew up in New York City. Could you imagine? That would have been so cool. No, I grew up in some fuck-ass suburb of Washington, DC. So yeah, most of the people, in fact, like a good half of the people around the DC area are like federal agents and political operatives and consultants. You know, so you're like, if you grow up in that area, you get exposed to politics pretty quick. And over time, I got more interested in it. I started learning more and more and more. I went through various phases of being a authoritarian Leninist soc dem, and like over time, just sort of didn't really move further left per se, because I was always a pretty far left individual, but fleshed out my priors more and more with each successive, you know, archaeology class that I took, each successive book that I read, each study that I read, and, you know, that philosophy class that I took, you know, as well as doing this stream has actually helped me flesh out my priors quite a bit, because I've reacted to content that has been ultimately somewhat disagreeable at times. And so it's helped me understand why I believe what I believe, and helped me sort of refine that. Yet just close to the center, you instantly become communist. Nowhere left, at least to my... Oh, yeah, no. Don't get me wrong. The Dems are not a representative of the left. Not in America. America does not have... Well, I would say America does not have a meaningful representative for left-wing politics, but that's not entirely true, because the Democratic Socialists of America have been making some waves. You know, the DSA is even somewhat more moderate than I would consider appropriate for the current moment, but it's a start, and they can at least get the ball rolling in the right direction, you know? But yeah, in America, it's like if you are to the right of fucking Adolf Hitler, they call you a communist. But the interesting thing is, for people outside of America, you might not be as well appraised of this. That rhetoric was mostly born out of the 1950s and the McCarthyist era of the Cold War, you know, and it persisted for a long time. The problem is, most of the people who were born and grew up in the days when the Soviet Union posed a real and credible, perceptible threat to the United States and their interests, since those days, most of those people who grew up for that are dead now. You know, the majority of society did not grow up in a time when the Soviet Union could be credibly argued to be a threat to America in any capacity. So a lot of times, like, the media and political class still tries to browbeat people by saying, oh, you're a socialist, you're a communist, at least on occasion. But it's long since, like, fallen flat. And in fact, if you have noticed, despite, you know, the insane propagandizing of current American news media, which is worse than it's ever been, if I don't say so myself, they will just kind of casually mention the fact that somebody's a socialist. Like, it's like, oh, what an interesting thing, because there's not many of those in America. But it's not something that they can really load with that much negative framing up front anymore. Not to any degree of success without, like, looking stupid anyway. As a matter of fact, the tone that they usually strike when they say, oh, so you're a socialist, is more like, oh, well, that's interesting and trendy, isn't it? You must be popular with young people. They say it's because we call them fascists. What? You're not for the government. Look, you're for the other fascists, then you're a communist? Yeah, like, Gotron, that was the line for the longest time. If you disagree with me, you're a communist. But that just you can only say that so many times until it falls flat. Say it is because we call them fascists. They do always say that. They had a stint of that in America as well. You must understand that all of your right-wing politics, or at least the majority of your right-wing politics in your country in the 21st century, were exported from America. They are cultural exports from the United States. They use a lot of the same talking points that our right-wing, like, politicians and pundits do here, which is why you get the whole, like, oh, you see, the left is just so mean that obviously we had to do the fascist stuff. That's what Republicans and the right were saying in America about anywhere from the range of 5 years ago to about 2 or 3 years ago. You know, like, oh, the left is so mean. Actually, I would say even, like, as early as the, like, late 2010s, they were saying this. We have people who want to reintroduce military service. That is actually not an export from America, because America could never fucking get away with that. That is a unique element of fascism to Europe, where part and parcel to their construction of a sort of nouveau authoritarian state for the 21st century, they're trying to reintroduce a credible military threat. In a way, it's similar to how America behaves, but it's not entirely derived from the right-wing politics of America. You know, because America was trying to do a very Cold War-esque version of this with China. And there are similarities there with how Europe talks about Russia, but it's quite different in its political context and origins, because it originates from the credible threat of Russia invading Ukraine. But more or less, what it boils down to is them performatively losing aura over how afraid they are of Russia, when Russia can't even fucking get into Ukraine without losing its entire stock of military supplies, right? These youngsters nowadays don't know the values. Yeah, there are very frequent anti-youth talking points in America too, though they have also, like, slowed down a bit in recent years. Nonetheless, I'm getting a bit off track, I say, because I also fell off. I'm so funny. You should follow and subscribe. I would like to get back to this video if I can.
The proposal would even allow income tax payments to be deducted from the total amount owed. This is a case of making sure people don't evade income tax through wealth, rather than a true soak the rich proposal. Where this maybe isn't such a modest policy is in the creation and enforcement. Having a global wealth tax sidesteps obvious problems of avoidance because the very rich can't leave the earth. Just yet. Still,
You understand
it is no
Wheel
mean
Witch?
feat.
Oh, you mean like Wheel Wizard or whatever? I'm actually not playing on Dolphin. I'm playing this on console. I'm on my my Wii U right now.
We've already got some international institutions that tax and enact tariffs, but we're a far cry from assessing everyone's assets everywhere and managing to gather money from all of them. Still,
This is the same thing that Piketty, Thomas Piketty proposed that should happen. Fucking cool, thank you. This is the same thing that Thomas Piketty proposed should happen, a global wealth tax. How does it perform compared to Wii? I assume about the same. It performs fine from what I have experienced with it. It feels pretty good too. But yeah, Thomas Piketty and Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zucman, the authors of Capital in the 21st Century, as well in the 21st century, as well as Capital and Ideology, have proposed one such wealth tax that would be applied globally, so it's inescapable. I don't know if it's higher quality. It's 720p, so it's like half the resolution, but it runs very smoothly, and I'm happy with it. And Piketty also proposed an interesting sort of global offshore assets tax, where like it would be tied to the nationality of the person, and it would be a 0.1% or 0.01% tax, 1/100th of 1%, not necessarily for the purpose of generating a long-term revenue stream, but for the purpose of having a number of tax revenue that you could use to estimate how much money is really in these offshore accounts. And quite frankly, even if you tax offshore assets at 0.01% each year, I think that would actually generate like a lot of money. That might be several $billion, you know, or like hundreds of millions. That'd be enough for some like pretty significant public works projects. But more importantly, as he outlines in his books and in his research, what it would really do that we're interested in is sort of give you a number that you can easily multiply by a pretty round 10,000 to get an image of, okay, about how much wealth is really sitting in these accounts. So that eventually you can come for it all. Because that's eventually the objective. Even, you know, Piketty has some pretty moderate proposals as well, but ultimately he understands too that the objective is to just tax offshore assets out of existence, because those should not exist. They're just bad for all sorts of economics, because the velocity of money in those offshore accounts is pretty flatly zero. They sit in those offshore accounts, they don't do anything, they don't contribute to anything except for compounding upon themselves and the number gradually going ever higher, you know? But this is a good idea, and this is evidence that unlearning economics does in fact know ball.
I'd love to see it.
He is in fact balling right now. He will never be balling. And then the fucking next
institutions that tax and enact tariffs, but we're a far cry from assessing everyone's assets everywhere and managing to gather money from all of them. Still, I'd love to see it. Remember that too. In absence of a global tax for now, it is worth discussing avoidance more generally, because it always comes up as an argument against wealth taxes. Zucman is quite strong on the avoidance issue, and he gives us a few tools to manage the wealthy leaving. One of them is to tax people based on citizenship rather than residence.
Is your girl not cooking? Is your girl not fucking cooking? One of the economists that I respect more than just about anybody else in the field participated in a research project that cultivated 150 years of available data to get an accurate picture of the evolution of wealth and income inequality. And he's saying, yeah, you should tax people based on their citizenship and legal status of like belonging to a certain country rather than where their assets are or where they claim their residence is. You love to see it. The expert agrees with me. It's almost like my priors have been validated, baby. I was right the whole time.
So moving makes no difference. Another is to charge people a fee for leaving a country permanently. Curiously, these both have precedent in the USA, that ultra-free market capitalist dystopia. You may have spotted earlier that the USA has higher effective rates at the top than the Netherlands or France, something you probably wouldn't have guessed based on popular narratives about Europe and America.
That I actually would have guessed based on purely one kind of tax or another. Europe is known for having high tax rates, which they do. But the different kinds of income and wealth are taxed differently in Europe and America. So it makes sense that maybe for income? Yeah, effective income tax, right? Income taxes in America appear to be much higher, but Europe has a overall more progressive tax system in some ways, I think. I don't know I don't remember a lot of the specifics. But Europe is a less economically unequal place than the United States, as impressive as that is. But yes, I think it's the reason that sometimes America's tax base might appear to be more robust, the taxes might appear to be higher, is ultimately because we're not taxing as much of the wealth in its format, if that makes sense. It's income taxes appear to be higher because we're not taxing wealth as much.
This is precisely because the USA is quite strict about not letting the wealthy avoid their taxes so easily. On top of the difficulty of avoiding tax through emigration, they have various laws that prevent the wealthy from using holding companies to avoid tax in the first place. So there is precedent for just clamping down on avoidance, even if we can't manage a global tax straight away. So the second proposal is a tax on centimillionaires.
Federally, America has that law. There are individual states that are tax havens where you can kind of avoid those. So federally, those numbers get reported, but if you look at state-by-state taxes, then the number tells quite a different story. Hell, damn it.
To make sure they are paying the same rate of tax as the rest of us. This is welcome and in some senses ambitious, but it is also modest as it leaves so much wealth untaxed and doesn't even make the tax system progressive, it just levels it out. Therefore, the final proposal we'll talk about is the boldest and the one with the most political momentum. Campaign groups in my country, like the Trade Union Congress and Tax Justice UK, backed by the Green Party and even raised in Parliament, want an annual 2% tax on wealth above £10 million in assets.
We're arguing particularly for a wealth tax, which would be 2% on above a tax threshold of £10 million. So we are talking about really quite serious levels of wealth there.
They say it would raise £24 billion a year. For context,
That's a lot of money for the UK. Country of 65-ish million, 60 to 70 million. Haha, 6-7, funny. 24 billion pounds per year? You know what you could do with 24 billion pounds in a year? You could solve the fucking housing crisis with that money. You could fucking that money, no joke, could make a dent in weathering the climate crisis.
24 billion is not nothing. It's roughly the size of the entire NHS funding boost of the last.
A lot of the costs that we have to worry about are very heavily inflated. When we're talking about essential infrastructure that countries benefit from for decades and centuries on end, it's not that expensive to build, comparatively speaking. It may cost millions, it may cost hundreds of millions, it may cost billions. But for how big the projects are, it's vastly less than funneling it into black holes of consultancy. Does that make sense?
Spending review. Tax Justice claims it's enough to reverse the planned disability benefit cuts, bring back the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, and still have plenty left for the health service. Where does this figure come from? It's an online simulator based on modelling by Aaron Advani and colleagues. Advani was also involved in the Wealth Tax Commission.
No, that fucking guy.
They used data from the UK Wealth and Asset Survey, a dataset I've used in the past which has comprehensive assessments of the UK population's housing,
their data's probably good though.
Pensions, insurance, valuable items, shares, and other financial assets. Advani and Co. also used the Sunday Times Rich List, which documents the top 1,000 richest people in Britain, who tend to be undercounted in standard surveys like WAS. Based on their research, they make assumptions about asset values, avoidance levels, thresholds, the rate, and which assets are to be included. These can all be tweaked in the simulator. My issue with parading that kind of figure around is that the headline of £24 billion is at the optimistic end of the simulator's range. Plus, the 24 billion isn't actually in Advani & Co.'s original report. It's the output of a simulator set to the specific rate and threshold that campaigners favour. If you stick with Advani & Co.'s original proposal, then you're closer to 10 billion, less than half of what campaigners promised.
10 billion per year is still a lot of money. Like, we're talking in terms of orders of magnitude, right? When you talk about economics at scale like this, we're talking about orders of magnitude, which means like multiples of 10. If something produces a big number and then you find a more realistic assessment or more modest assessment and it still produces 50% of that number, that's actually like huge, you know? It'd be like getting disappointed that, I don't know, building new social housing projects only fixed 50% of the housing crisis instead of 100% of the housing crisis, right? 50% is still a massive, resounding, like, even like anything that's like even statistically significant would be considered a success. 20% is huge in like economics, you know? And so like 10 billion pounds, absolutely nothing to sneeze at.
If you go with entirely different modelling choices, then maybe you've got even less. What is
The
right
funny
depends
plus
on
one.
both how much wealth there actually is and how the wealthy react, which we don't truly know until we try to measure it. Some assets might be worth much less, or...
See, and this is exactly why you don't want to do a one-off, right? A one-off is useful for one and only one thing, which is seeing how much money you can raise at the peak of a wealth tax's potential, right? But that's kind of useless outside of other points of data that are just as essential. One of them being, how will people respond to this wealth tax? You know, these are behavioral fields.
Or much harder to tax than we expect. The problem is that most people never really look into where these numbers come from, they just repeat them because they sound convenient. This is true even though the economists who produced them...
This is largely true for most people. It used to be true for myself as well. And obviously, I most readily refer to numbers that are most convenient to make a point, right? But for the sake of argument, or for the sake of engaging in a discussion about any given topic, there's really no such thing as a inconvenient statistic if the statistic is accurate, right? Because I try to base my belief system off of what can be empirically shown to make things better, right? You know, consider if you're having an argument with your garden variety racist online and they post about like 1350. Yeah, generally that's a statistic that exists and it's pretty real. I don't think those numbers exactly match up, but it's like pretty close. But there's an explanation for that. And the reason that they're citing it is they're abusing the data. But, you know, it's data. It doesn't necessarily speak for itself. You know, you have to understand the context of where that data comes from and what it is referring to, and like, you know, whether it's correlative, causative, or what's the term? Spurious? It's like the next step down from correlative. You know, where the argument from your garden variety white supremacist would be like, oh, you know, black people commit disproportionate amounts of crime, therefore they're just like bad or something. But in reality, that doesn't make that argument doesn't make that number like inconvenient or anything, because the real reason for it existing is that minorities are more likely to be poor, and poverty makes people more likely to commit crime. It puts immense amounts of stress on people. They start behaving irrationally and doing things that you otherwise wouldn't or shouldn't, you know? So when you have that 13% of the population that is disproportionately represented in the lowest socioeconomic echelons that have ultimately been relegated there and are, you know, not necessarily, you know, live on the margins, of course they're going to be overrepresented statistically in statistics relating to criminality, because that's how crime works. Poor people commit more petty crime on average than people who are like decently well-to-do, because poverty is a set of like very antisocial circumstances that makes your life worse.
are completely upfront about how sensitive they are to their assumptions.
But that's the fucking ascended Dr. Manhattan position of being able to actually read and interpret data.
But why am I hand-wringing over this? Is this just details? As I said at the start to Barry, if we try this with optimistic assessments of revenue and then fall substantially short, we risk discrediting the idea while not getting the money we'd hoped for, and then probably having to raise taxes on the middle class.
This is what politicians did on purpose to justify further austerity. They designed wealth taxes that were bad and wouldn't work, so that when they wouldn't work, they could turn to the public and say, guys, we tried it, it didn't work. I guess we have no choice but to tax the poor and the middle class more, which then widened the gap. It actually made inequality worse, right? And contributed to a sense of apathy and capitalist realism, where people would start to believe, oh, there truly is no other way, and thus would permit those inequalities to exist, grow, and fester for longer. Even though what we're experiencing is not even remotely inevitable and is so completely unique to this historical moment that oftentimes we lack historical precedents with which to adequately describe it.
Then what happens?
People, your taxes are high because of illegal immigrants. That's right, illegal immigrants.
Okay, so that is already happening.
There you go.
We're already blaming
They do that
immigrants
too.
instead of talking about wealth taxes. But this is exactly the point I'm building towards. A wealth tax is primarily a political project, not an economic one.
Yes.
Even if we accept the optimistic £24 billion figure,
okay.
It's still under 2% of what the...
Yes and no, right? Oh, it's a political project, not an economic one? The answer is yes to both, actually, because we need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that somehow economics is not political. Economics means... the Greek root word for economics is ekonomika, which means household. It's literally the management of resources for the household. In this case, the household being the nation, the entire nation. Economics cannot be anything other than political. You know, by nature, it is political. Also, I missed the trick somehow. You know, there's no such thing as the separation between politics and economics, right? That's for cowards.
the UK government spends in a year. In the context of a state spending well over £1 trillion, a wealth tax isn't too significant for funding. So, why
who got a pow in this fucking place? Also, to his point earlier, that actually gets to what I was saying earlier, that, like, by virtue of him saying, like, it's a political project, what we're getting at here is that you don't just do a wealth tax because it's, like, competent management of money. You do it because it aligns with your priorities politically of wanting society to not be an unequal shithole of inequality, right? Like, that's why you do a wealth tax. Not because you're a money manager interested in not molesting the money too hard, right? Ouch, bad race.
Economists tend to talk about economics, and that makes sense because they're economists. Unfortunately, economists dominate policy and media discussions, which means that so much of our debate about economic instruments like taxation gets narrowed by a focus on something like revenue.
I mean, the primary goal is to collect revenue, to finance expenditures.
What we need to understand is that addressing wealth inequality is a much broader, long-term struggle than just...
Economists also have, ironically, for their supposed expertise in the field, have a very one-dimensional view of the government accruing revenue. Like I said, that they kind of take it in no context at all, such that they believe it, like, goes nowhere. And ultimately, like, you can't have those kinds of discussions outside of the priority of, like, what are taxes used for? Like, you can't have an image of good tax policy without an understanding of what good means. What is the tax policy for? What are you using those taxes for? Why are you collecting taxes in the first place, right?
Implementing a tax that makes as much money as possible. Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century was released in 2000.
I have read that book 2 times. It's great. Well, from my nerdy communist trans femme perspective, it's great because it's about economics. Holy fuck, I'm getting bumped.
14, and it was probably the first major book to mention a wealth tax. Yet, if you reread it, Piketty was always 100% clear that revenue was not his main aim. Imagine a very low global tax on capital, say a flat rate of 0.1% a year on all assets. The revenue from such a tax would of course be limited by design. Even so, such a limited tax would already play a very useful role. It would generate information about the distribution of
Yes,
wealth.
this is what I was talking
Citizens
about.
would no longer be forced to rely on Forbes, glossy financial reports from global wealth managers, and other unofficial sources to fill the official statistical void. Truly democratic debate cannot proceed without reliable statistics.
My allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy!
Piketty aura farming, you love to see it.
Contemporary debate, which tends to focus on revenue. In contrast, Piketty links the wealth tax to the ongoing project
It is also
established from the French Revolution.
It is also important that, like, earlier they mentioned that there's an incentive created by a wealth tax for you to not hold on to your wealth as much, and that is also like way more important than just generating a stream of revenue, right? Even if a wealth tax isn't the best thing for generating a stream of revenue, let's say, it would be really good when you understand that your aim here is also to like reduce the inequality in society and create an environment where capital and resources flow around more freely, a higher velocity of money, per John Maynard Keynes. And a 1%, even a 1 or a 5% wealth tax, pretty modest wealth tax, could achieve that because it's now significantly less feasible to just accumulate wealth infinitely in formats that are very difficult to tax, because now you have to be upfront about how much you have, and you have to pay a proportion of that to the government each year in a way that sort of prevents it from growing beyond a certain extent, and in a way that might even make it impossible for it to grow at all. Which means use it or lose it, pal. You know? And so when you have this tax bracket, this tax system, or just this tax that creates the incentive for people to spend money rather than hold on to it, you make society more equal. You make everybody wealthier because the wealthy have an incentive not to hold on to everything. You know, they have an incentive not to buy 50 additional properties and sit on them for speculative gains because they have to pay taxes on them every year, right? They have an incentive not to cultivate highly illiquid stashes of wealth and capital, right? So as a result, capital keeps flowing. It keeps moving around because you can't just hold it in place. It's like impossible to do that for so long, you know? And I think that's actually the most important part. That's like the most important thing that you would want from a wealth tax, you know?
Evolution of making the economy visible to the state and to society.
Yes.
This might sound softer than hitting the wealthy with a big tax, but it's easy to underestimate. Think about organised crime. It is generally a priority for criminals to stay out of reach of the authorities.
Mhm.
And this isn't because they can't afford to pay a 20% tax or something. It's because without recording and documentation, their whole enterprise is invisible to the authorities.
Yes,
Famously,
that's
when
right.
they finally got Al Capone, they did it on tax evasion. Bringing wealth into the tax system is the first step for true accountability for those who own it. In that sense, a wealth tax is a normative project. As Piketty says, it is important to understand that a tax is always more than just a tax. It is also a way of defining norms and categories and imposing a legal framework on economic activity. This has always been the case, especially in regard to land ownership. I'll try to be fair here.
Yes,
Many
land
of those
taxes.
who have quite a bit of money probably aren't
Basically
involved
the
in
same as
organised crime.
property taxes.
On the other hand, look at the Epstein scandal.
Well,
for a long time,
I actually intend to disagree with this. The wealthy are organized crime, and organized crime are the wealthy. You think about organized crime, it's a business enterprise. it's illicit, but it is a business, right? It's literally the same thing. The state just views it differently, you know? Where they think in terms of profits and like accounting and control over territory or various assets and things like that. This is not even me alleging that like the wealthy are wrapped up in the mafia, literally. This is me alleging that it's fundamentally the same relationship, you know, an exploitative relationship that revolves around accumulating capital, right? Like a lot of the mafia and like the cartels as well, business cartels in America that were previously illegal didn't go away. They just went legit.
The wealthy have been out of sight, hidden and thinking they can get away with everything they want. Making their wealth visible is a big step towards bringing them into the fold and stopping them from literally getting away with murder. Most economists who review the wealth tax agree that there are better ways to raise revenue from the rich, like increasing existing taxes or better enforcement. Richard Murphy has some nice videos about this if you want to learn more. I tend to agree with his arguments about revenue. Murphy is against a wealth tax because of low revenue and lengthy implementation. He's surely right about these, but I think he misses the political importance of mapping out wealth. This reframes the issues with valuation and administration. Yes, it will be costly and take a long time and be full of but we should understand it as a political shift.
This is another moment where I feel like economists are just kind of economically illiterate at times, where it's like, the wealth tax doesn't literally suck my dick, so I don't like it. Where it's like, well, that's not the fucking point, you know?
Intended to bring the wealthy to heel and remind them of their obligations to the rest of us. It can't be dismissed if revenues are lower than expected, because that's no longer the point. Instead, measuring wealth across the economy becomes an exercise in promoting transparency and accountability, which helps to inform democratic debate, research and policy. We did it for income and even for some kinds of assets already. Now it's time to truly understand what wealth looks like. As Anisha Stephen pointed out in their article on the joy of tax, visibility is the first stage towards accountability. Throughout history, taxation has functioned not merely as a means to help resource the government, but as an instrument
far
of
up there,
visibility and control. Political theorist James C. Scott argued that states are often more motivated to tax in order to render societies legible in order to govern. A wealth tax is less about squeezing out revenue than about proper governance. Perhaps strangely,
I really,
love the one-off tax.
It's worth mentioning, I really don't like James C. Scott, but he is correct in this respect. Taxes contribute to a very readable society where you can actually, to some extent, account for it in accounting books. And that helps with respect to managing resources at scale, right? You need that information to be readable and somewhat potable, in fact. You know, you can't have it as like a barely legible mess. You know what they say about a broken clock? I do know what they say about a broken clock. And yes, it is, you know, that is true about states. They do love to deal with information. And so they need to have that information in some kind of legible format. That much is true. And thus, I think it's also true that writing, at least in the case of the Middle East, was initially invented as an accounting metric and was later adopted because it was a useful abstraction of language in a potable format. It was then later adopted for things like poetry and literature. But initially, the reason that most language has its origin in pictograms is because they were literally drawing the things that they were accounting for. Like, oh, bushels of grain. Let me draw a little bag with like some wheat sticking out of it, right? That's what grain looks like. Oh, how many of those do we have? I don't know, 500. What does that look like? I don't know. I'll put like some fucking, I'll put like 500 sticks, right? And that'll be like 500, and you have the little picture. That's how many of those that we have. That's the origin of writing. It's quite interesting.
Tax. Despite the juicy revenue it could raise, it would eliminate the case for an ongoing annual wealth tax.
In fact, that's why kanji and like particularly a lot of East Asian languages that still reside in something of a pictogram format, why the characters themselves can have that kind of meaning behind them, where the character itself can represent something, you know, as opposed to just being a phoneme or a sound, which more abstracted languages that use, for example, the Latin or Cyrillic alphabet do, where like each letter is a sound. Each letter can be a concept in these pictogram-based languages.
The matter would be considered settled for a generation. We get a lump sum one year, but not the next. Then the formerly rich would rebuild their wealth, or a new generation of bastards would get wealthy, and we'd be right back to square one. It's a cleaner tax in the short term, but that's precisely why it's not ambitious enough. In fact, I'd gladly get behind an extremely low...
Well, if it creates a long-term incentive, that's not necessarily a worry. But this is an argument in favor of a 100% tax rate, because ultimately the problem is that money is permanent. It's not temporary. You can accumulate it. That's why money accumulates, because it can. Hard to think about. As words help people understand reality? Yes. Yeah. These funny little lines and abstractions that we draw on paper or etch into stone mean things, and your brain looks at them and like, oh, that means this. You see the funny squiggly lines that spell out a word and your brain reads it and it says cat, and you form an image in your brain based on a culturally agreed upon standard for what those squiggly lines mean. It's crazy. Imagine trying to learn about stuff you didn't have any words you've ever learned. That's what oral histories were. You know, spoken language with very intricate linguistic rules existed long before writing systems did. You know, writing systems evolved for societies to be able to manage themselves at scale. That's why they exist. Oh no, I got bumped. I didn't mean just written language. Oh, well, people mostly just kind of... Have you seen the way that, like, animals communicate with one another? Have you seen the way that, like, we perceive them as doing it? Because that's how humans did that. You know? Where you would use the intonation of grunts, essentially. Body language, that sort of thing. To, you know, learn. And for a lot of these things as well, it was kind of a move it or lose it kind of situation where there was a very real threat that you might just die if you weren't able to pick up on things decently quick. Nice.
Wealth tax, 0.1% Piketty style, on an extremely broad base, mapping out as much wealth as possible across the global distribution.
Getting that shit sloppy Piketty style.
On the truly ultra wealthy, to make sure they are at least paying as much tax as everyone else.
I don't know why that didn't work that
time. These twin
time.
aims of fairness and accountability should be the motivating force behind this project. Rather than acquiring revenue we could get more easily and quickly elsewhere, and any revenue there was could be used to maybe reverse the cuts to vaccine and nutrition programs on a more permanent basis. You know, detach them from the US military-industrial complex or something. The modern economy has seen a massive growth in assets and wealth, and modern wealth inequality has risen at the same time. It's possible that our previous categories, mostly focused on income as they were, have failed to understand this, and one of the projects...
It's a nightmare. Retro Rewind has massive problems with the translations. I thought it couldn't run at all. Yeah, I mean, notably, I'm using the English version, so I don't think there's many problems there, but...
of the 21st century will be to do so. Now, one argument against this is privacy. Why does the state have the right to know everyone's wealth, say libertarians? The answer is that currently...
Because you don't have the fucking right to keep that shit. Like, it's always the people who fucking own multi-billion... or either own multi-billion-dollar enterprises that control massive territories and, like, sums of properties and assets, that will say like, why do you get to know what I own? Like, motherfucker, you dictate the fucking course of people, like thousands of people's lives. You don't get to fucking be a petty tyrant. Sorry. Your rights end where somebody else's rights begin. And your rights do not extend beyond the rights of the thousands of people that are subject to your fucking whims and desires here. So no, you don't get to own unlimited things. Yeah, it's just because they have a power fantasy about being the good tyrant or something. You know? It's like, I don't know, do you have the fucking right to kill thousands from your mismanagement of resources? No, you fucking don't. So why don't you, like, let... you? the fucking shit that you have is essential to society, so you don't get to claim it personally. Right? Like, that's what it comes down to. Oh, yeah, you own such a large network of logistics and good and service distribution that, like, it's essential to the basic functionality of society and determines whether people live or die. You don't get to control that. That's some fucking essential resource shit. You don't get to have that personally. You know? You would say they worked hard? Yeah, libertarians when they fucking lie. Libertarians have never met a hard day's work in their life, unless they're computer scientists, in which case they're just retarded. Oh, he tried to hit.
The state has much more visibility and control over the life of the average person, and especially of the average poor person. This is a basic question of equality, something Stephen also points out. The US tax system has long operated as a machine of selective visibility. Today, working class Americans are subject to invasive scrutiny. Meanwhile, the wealthy conceal assets in trusts, shell corporations, and offshore accounts. This asymmetry is not accidental, it is a structural feature of the fiscal state. Now, you can get all anarchist about this, and that's a very structural feature and offshore accounts. This asymmetry...
That's true, actually. And this can be solved by giving the IRS more money. The IRS has said on numerous occasions, and I've outlined this on numerous occasions, the reason they only try to target poor tax cheats and not rich tax cheats is because they don't have enough money to go after the rich tax cheats. That's where all the money is. The IRS knows it, but they never get the proper funding to target those kinds of people. Which is why there's that asymmetry, because the government specifically limits its own capabilities as a matter of ideological priorities. They don't want to lay hands on the wealth of the rich. They're only comfortable doing that to the wealth of the poor, because the poor are less adept at fighting back, you know?
Symmetry is not accidental, it is a structural feature of the fiscal state. Now, you can get all anarchist about this, and that's a very big
So
debate,
yes,
but
it is a
ultimately,
fiscal
proper
structure.
statecraft,
It is a feature,
according to principles laid out
structurally.
in the French Revolution of liberty, equality.
All society can be boiled down to school dynamics. It can, but it's not necessarily the most accurate. That's kind of what boiling down is. But yeah, you know, I mean, school is the place they put you to learn about society. By the way, you're so cool. Thank you. Well, I'd say I try real hard, but the truth is I'm not trying to be cool. I'm trying to be a nerd and sexy, and I'm trying to learn, ultimately. That's what I'm trying to do. Like, who the fuck else would be able to maintain even a semblance of competent driving faculties while listening to essentially PhD level economics and commenting on it at the same time, right? Like, that's something, I had to practice this. I used to be really shit at this.
And fraternity would lead
I'm still
to
not
a
that good at
better
it.
and more equal society that delivers a broad range of benefits to the
I would love to craft a time machine. Me too, sister.
population as a whole. I suspect some would consider this case for a wealth tax vibes-based. But if you think that, you fail to understand the purpose of taxation in the first place. We live in an era where we lack social cohesion, where the rich are corrupt and detached, and where politics has become hugely polarized.
Oh,
we
yeah.
underestimate the
the "We're from the future" meme, and it's like the three friends, and two of them are like, "Whoa, that's so cool," and then it's like, but one of them's like, "Wait a minute, you're a girl." Yes, I love that meme. That's me. I'm actually, it's funny because I'm the one person in that situation where, like, if you went back in time to my college friends, like, we're all doing our own shit nowadays, but like the me that comes through the time machine would be full girly pop, and I'd be like, wait a minute, you know, past me at the very least.
Vibes at our peril, because the vibes have been off for a fucking long time.
That's
And
true.
Look where that's got us. As Stephen says, if we don't ensure the wealthy are taxed properly, we may wake up in a country where taxation still exists, but democracy does not.
Yeah.
Let's rediscover the spirit of
That's
the
actually kind of fire as a
good,
line.
honest governance.
You will never believe you get to be a trans girl and a commie. Yeah. Fucking woman of my dreams. But it's actually just me from the future.
And you know, if the wealth tax doesn't work out, the French Revolution gave us other options too.
You love to see it. You do love to see it. But that was the end of the video. So, I think that's that. Oof. So, very interesting stuff from Unlearning Economics. What was he vague posting at the end? He was vague posting about, like, if this doesn't work out, we do literally need to resort to French revolutionary tactics, which I agree. The issue of income inequality, even more moderate economists will agree, threatens to tear society apart, which is ultimately framing that even that Marx would agree with. Marx wrote about this issue 150, actually close to 200 years ago now, where it wasn't necessarily just the end state of inequality that threatened to tear society apart, but rather the systematic antagonisms that caused that inequality in the first place. They cause fundamental tensions in society that make things very difficult and can threaten to tear things apart. And we're only now at the point where that inequality, as a result of those class contradictions, is at the point where society actually is starting to be torn apart piece by piece, right? Such that even mainstream non-Marxian economists would have to acknowledge it, right? If the situation is so severe that economists who would openly argue against Marx are acknowledging the nature of the problem, then the imperative is severe enough that you're justified in vague posting about revolution. In fact, you're justified in doing more than that, but it's understandable if you don't want to get in trouble for literally advocating that head's role for this. You know? I think that's actually a really strong conclusion. I would disagree somewhat with some of the analysis presented there, but ultimately, the gist of it was thus. How would a wealth tax work? We'll consult the findings and research of various economists, see what they have to say. There are many potential hiccups, as there are with any policy. We shouldn't let that dissuade us. In fact, it's probably more imperative that we just do it to get the ball rolling in any direction, rather than sit around debating about it. And just like any other policy, these issues are by no means insurmountable. They're not things that are impossible to fix. So essentially, those are a bunch of bridges that we can keep in mind, but we'll cross them when we come to them, right? And ultimately, the priority needs to be, because all of this is still down to a game of what is your priority for society. The priority is ultimately this distribution of wealth and the accumulation of wealth, the siphoning of wealth upwards is not sustainable. People are suffering in very large numbers, in fact. And this is something that could contribute in any particular way that they outlined, either through revenue, visibility, or the incentive that would compel the wealthy to actually sell off a number of their assets. Any one of those three things would help, so we should do it. And if by some factor that doesn't work, we need to resort to more drastic measures. a pretty solid line of argumentation, borderline unassailable, I would even say. If anything, I think it is quite modest, keeping in line with the tendencies of many economists that they imply that right now might not even be the time for some kind of drastic revolutionary action, big political upheaval, or something like that, until we try this one other thing. I think the fact that we're even talking about that as a realistic path that we might eventually need to resort to indicates the need for it right now. But yeah, good things are good. When rich people have literally all of the wealth and money and power on earth, that's bad, because we all live here too, and we need to fucking afford rent and like hang out with friends and eat and not starve to death, and probably plap our cute baby girl every now and again without worrying that one of us is gonna, die in a few months from not being able to afford their medicine. Pretty basic, I think, but it's good stuff. I think that's a good place to cap it off there. Thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate when people tune in and hang out in the chat. The hope is that I can get a few more eyeballs on this stream. At this point, I'm not even considering this as a career path. I'm just doing it for fun, and I'm hoping that I can like maybe show off, maybe aura farm a little bit to the fine folks who might also be playing Mario Kart Wii. I know I saw Embrez a couple days ago, I guess, or no, yesterday, not a couple days ago. There have been some uncommon viewers that I'm hoping to make a positive impression on and make more common, because I enjoy this sort of parasocial engagement where I get to feel like the chat is my classroom and I'm the professor, the sexy professor that students might have a crush on. I don't know. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, even donate to support the channel. It would really mean a lot to me.